Camp Perry, Ohio, August 1943. The mess hall tables were set with something Private Klaus Weber had never seen before: sandwiches made from brown paste and purple jam. 2 slices of white bread holding ingredients that looked medicinal rather than edible. An American guard named Davis explained through the translator, "Peanut butter and jelly. American classic. Every kid grows up on this." Klaus lifted the sandwich and sniffed cautiously. The smell was nuts and sugar mixed in combination that seemed designed to confuse rather than satisfy. He took a bite. The taste was sweet and salty simultaneously, texture sticky in ways German food never was. What happened next challenged everything he thought he knew about American culture. Klaus Weber was 23 years old, from a small town outside Munich, had been captured in North Africa in May 1943, when his artillery unit surrendered to American forces during Tunisia's final collapse. He'd been a baker's apprentice before conscription, understood food in professional ways that most soldiers didn't, could evaluate ingredients and preparation with trained palate that recognized quality and technique. His expectations about American food had been shaped by propaganda's insistence that their cuisine was primitive, lacking sophistication, reflecting cultural shallowness that democracy produced. The journey to America had challenged some of those assumptions. The transport ship's meals were adequate, sometimes good, better than German military rations had been for months. The processing camp in New York had served breakfast that included pancake-strange flat cakes with maple syrup, sweet for breakfast in ways that felt wrong to German sensibilities, but tasted undeniably good. But nothing had quite prepared Klaus for the sheer strangeness of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Camp Perry sat on Lake Erie's shore, sprawling military facility that had been expanded to house German prisoners transferred from overcrowded East Coast camps. The August heat was oppressive, humidity from the lake making the air thick and difficult to breathe, everything feeling heavy and slow. The prisoners had been there a week, adjusting to American captivity's routines, learning camp rules, and work expectations, trying to figure out what aspects of propaganda had been true and what had been lies. The lunch that day had started normally, enough soup that was thin but flavorful, bread that was white and soft in ways German bread never was, American preference for texture over substance. Then the guards had distributed the sandwiches, 1 per prisoner, wrapped in wax paper, strange construction that prisoners examined with mixture of curiosity and suspicion. Corporal Heinrich Muller, who'd been a university student before the war, held his sandwich up to the light as if examining specimen under scientific scrutiny. "This is supposed to be food?" he asked in German. "It looks like something assembled in laboratory rather than kitchen. 2 ingredients that have no business being together, combined with American confidence that anything works if you're optimistic enough about it." Private Otto Fischer, farmer from Bavaria, was more pragmatic. "Food is food," he said, unwrapping his sandwich. "We've eaten worse in the field horse meat, boot leather soup, that bread in Tunisia that was half sawdust. If Americans think this is good, maybe it is. Or maybe their taste is broken. Only one way to find out." He took a large bite, chewed thoughtfully, his expression cycling through surprise, confusion, and something that might have been reluctant acceptance. Klaus approached his sandwich with baker's caution, analyzing before eating. The bread was standard American white bread, soft, slightly sweet, more like cake than proper bread, lacking the dense texture and complex flavor that German rye or wheat breads possessed. But it was fresh, well made within its limited aspirations, competent if not sophisticated. The peanut butter was more challenging. He'd never encountered peanuts as spread, only as occasional roasted snack, nuts crushed into paste, and sweetened texture that was simultaneously creamy and slightly gritty, sticking to the roof of his mouth in ways that felt almost aggressive. The flavor was intense nutty, obviously, but also salty and sweet simultaneously, American tendency to combine tastes that German cuisine kept separate. The jelly grape jelly, purple and translucent, was equally strange. Sweet beyond anything Klaus would have put in sandwich, fruit reduced to pure sugar delivery system, wobbling slightly on the bread like something not quite solid. German jams were fruit-forward, tartness balancing sweetness, texture maintaining some connection to original fruit. This was different pure sweetness, pure simplicity, optimized for children's palates rather than adult sophistication. He bit into the sandwich and experienced sensory overload. The sweetness hit first jelly coating his tongue, sugar activating receptors that expected savory at lunchtime. Then the peanut butter's richness, fatty and protein heavy, creating fullness in his mouth that was almost uncomfortable. The bread compressed and stuck, forming glutinous mass that required significant chewing, whole construction becoming pasty lump that was simultaneously satisfying and slightly revolting. He swallowed and looked at the remaining sandwich with new understanding. This wasn't sophisticated cuisine. This wasn't trying to be. This was pure functionality, calories, protein, sugar, fat, everything a body needed delivered in package that was cheap, portable, stable, requiring no refrigeration or complex preparation. This was industrial food, mass production applied to sustenance, American efficiency valuing effectiveness over elegance. Heinrich had similar realization, though his articulation was more intellectual. This sandwich represents everything about American culture: pragmatic, unpretentious, focused on what works rather than what's traditional. Germans would never combine these ingredients because they violate aesthetic principles about food bearing. But Americans don't care about principles if results are satisfactory. That's simultaneously liberating and disturbing. Otto's assessment was more direct. "It's weird," he said, finishing his sandwich despite apparent reservations. "But I'm full, and it tasted ... Not bad exactly, just different. Like everything American, strange, but functional. Breaking rules we didn't know could be broken. Succeeding through confidence rather than tradition." The American guards noticed the prisoner's reactions with amusement that wasn't quite mocking. Private Davis, a kid from Iowa who'd grown up on PB&J sandwiches, approached Klaus and the others, curious about German responses. "You guys have peanut butter in Germany?" he asked through the camp's translator, Corporal Schmidt, who'd immigrated from Hamburg before the war. Klaus shook his head. "We have peanuts, yes, but as snacks, not as paste for sandwiches. This combination, peanuts and fruit jam together, is completely foreign." "Not bad," he added quickly, seeing Davis's expression. "Just unexpected. Different from anything we'd eat at home." Davis grinned. "That's PB&J for you. Most American food imaginable. Every kid eats these growing up, pack them in lunch boxes, make them at home after school. Simple, fast, fills you up. My mom made me thousands of these over the years." He paused, something shifting in his expression. "Sent me a jar of peanut butter and jelly in a care package last month, actually. Made one yesterday, first time since shipping out. Tasted like home, you know. Like being 8 years old again. Like everything was simple and safe." A comment hung in the air. Unexpected vulnerability from guard to prisoner. Reminder that both were people displaced by war, missing homes and families and normal lives that conflict had disrupted. Klaus felt something shift in his perception. Davis wasn't just enemy guard, wasn't just American representing abstract national entity. He was kid from Iowa who missed his mother's cooking, who'd been eating the same sandwich as Klaus was now trying for the first time, who, deep informed by culture Klaus was beginning to understand, wasn't weak or shallow, but just different. The conversation expanded as other prisoners and guards gathered, impromptu cultural exchange developing around sandwiches that had started as just lunch. The Americans explained peanut butter's history, George Washington Carver's promotion of peanuts as crop, industrial processing that made peanut butter affordable, and shelf-stable, its emergence as American staple during Depression, when cheap protein mattered more than culinary sophistication. The Germans reciprocated with descriptions of their food culture, the importance of bread quality over convenience, preference for savory over sweet at meals, traditional combinations that had centuries of refinement behind them. But even as they explained, they recognized the implicit criticism in their own descriptions. German food was better in some ways, more sophisticated perhaps, but it required resources and time that America's industrial food system had optimized out of existence. Heinrich articulated the tension. German cuisine assumes abundance of time and moderate scarcity of resources, so we spend time making simple ingredients into complex dishes. American cuisine assumes scarcity of time but abundance of resources, so you create simple dishes from ingredients that have been industrially processed to be convenient. Neither is wrong, they're just optimized for different constraints. Over the following weeks, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches became a recurring element of camp meals, not daily, but often enough that prisoners grew accustomed to them, stopped finding them quite so strange, began to understand them as example of broader American food philosophy. The camp canteen stocked peanut butter and jelly in jars that prisoners could purchase with scrip earned through work details, allowing those interested to make their own sandwiches, to experiment with ratios and techniques. Klaus bought a jar of each, spending precious scrip on ingredients that initially seemed absurd, but that he'd become curious about professionally. He examined the peanut butter's consistency, tasted it alone to isolate its flavor profile, analyzed the production process that could transform peanuts into stable paste. The engineering was impressive food science applied to create product that was nutritious, inexpensive, shelf-stable for months, requiring no special storage or preparation. German food industry didn't operate at this scale or with this optimization focus. He experimented with sandwich construction, varying bread thickness, peanut butter to jelly ratios, trying different spreading techniques. He discovered that American children's preference for thin layers was practical wisdom. Too much peanut butter made sandwich nearly inedible, sticky mass that overwhelmed other flavors and created choking hazard. The optimal ratio was maybe 1-to-1, enough peanut butter for protein and flavor, but enough jelly to provide moisture and cut through the richness. Other prisoners adopted sandwiches with varying enthusiasm. Otto made them regularly, practical man recognizing efficient calorie delivery system when he saw one, not letting German food prejudices prevent him from eating well. Heinrich remained skeptical, willing to eat them but preferring traditional meals, viewing PB&J as acceptable expedient rather than desirable choice. Some prisoners refused entirely, unable to overcome cultural resistance to combination that seemed fundamentally wrong. But the sandwiches served function beyond just nutrition. They became cultural education, hands-on lesson about American values and industrial capacity. Each sandwich represented supply chains that could deliver peanuts from southern farms and grapes from California, processing facilities that could transform raw ingredients into stable products, distribution networks that made these items available everywhere from coast to coast, economic systems that generated such abundance that even prisoners could access these foods casually. Klaus was assigned to work detail at local peanut processing facility outside Toledo, and the experience transformed his understanding from abstract to concrete. The facility was an enormous sprawling complex where peanuts arrived by railcar, were cleaned and sorted and roasted and ground into paste, then packaged into jars that were sealed and labeled and shipped across the country. The scale was staggering. Industrial food production beyond anything he'd encountered in Germany. The facility manager, Mr. Thompson, explained the operation with pride that wasn't quite boasting. "We process 10,000 pounds of peanuts daily," he said through the translator. "That becomes maybe 30,000 jars of peanut butter weekly, distributed to stores, schools, military commissaries. One facility supplying entire region, keeping prices low enough that any family can afford it." Klaus watched the production line with professional fascination. The machinery was sophisticated, but reliable, designed for continuous operation, maintained to prevent breakdowns that would disrupt supply. The workers operated efficiently, each responsible for specific tasks, whole system running with precision that reminded him more of military logistics than food production. This was how America fought wars through industrial capacity that could produce both weapons and food at scales that overwhelmed opponents. He mentioned this to Thompson during a break, trying to articulate observation without sounding like he was revealing military secrets. This facility, Klaus said in broken English, produces more peanut butter in 1 week than all of Bavaria might consume in a year. That's not criticism, just observation about scale. How does America achieve this? Thompson considered before responding, seeming to understand Klaus was asking genuine question rather than gathering intelligence. Lots of factors, he said. Natural resources. We've got good farmland, reliable rainfall, mechanized agriculture that increases yields. Infrastructure railroads that move goods efficiently, electricity that powers factories, capital that funds expansion. Free market competition drives innovation, efficiency, lower prices. Culture Americans value convenience and consistency, create demand that justifies large-scale production. But he added something that stuck with Klaus. Also, we believe ordinary people deserve good things. Peanut butter isn't luxury for elites. It's everyday food for everyone. That democratization of quality, making good things affordable to all rather than reserving them for few, that's American principle that drives everything from food to politics to how we structure society. The observation was philosophical, almost political, but it resonated with Klaus's growing understanding of differences between German and American systems. German culture had emphasized hierarchy, quality determined by social position, best things reserved for those who deserved them through birth or achievement. American culture, whatever its flaws, seemed genuinely committed to idea that basic goods should be universally accessible, that ordinary people deserved decent food, comfortable homes, opportunities for advancement. Klaus wrote to his family in Munich with hands that shook slightly from more than just physical labor. What could he tell them about America, about captivity that was more comfortable than military service had been, about food that was strange but abundant, about prisoners eating better than German civilians? The contradictions were too large for simple letters, but he tried anyway. He wrote, "The Americans feed us sandwiches made from peanut paste and fruit jam. Strange combination. Took getting used to, but it's nutritious and filling. The peanut butter is made in factories that process thousands of pounds daily, distributed everywhere, available to everyone." This is small thing, just food, but it represents something larger about American capacity and values that propaganda didn't prepare us to encounter. I work at peanut processing facility. The scale is enormous, machinery sophisticated, operation efficient beyond anything I've seen. One American factory produces more in a week than we might produce in months. Their abundance isn't illusion or temporary. It's structural, built into systems that generate surplus as routine, rather than requiring constant effort to maintain adequacy. I don't know what this means for war's outcome or for Germany's future, but I know propaganda was wrong about American weakness. They're not weak. They're so strong they can afford to be generous, to share abundance casually, to treat prisoners with decency because the cost is negligible relative to their total resources. That strength, demonstrated through peanut butter sandwiches and other small daily things, is more convincing than any military display could be. The letter was intercepted by censors who flagged it as containing observations about American industrial capacity. But the camp commander, reading it, approved its transmission with note: prisoner making accurate observations about food production. Information not strategic, merely factual. Allow letter to proceed. The letter reached Munich 3 months later, read by Klaus's mother, who wept understanding her son was safe, was fed, was beginning to understand truths that regime had hidden. Heinrich wrote more analytical letters. His university education, showing through even in censored correspondence. The peanut butter sandwich is metaphor for American culture's simple, unpretentious, optimized for functionality rather than sophistication. Germans would never create this food because it violates our aesthetic principles about proper combinations and preparations. But Americans don't care about those principles. They care about what works, what's practical, what achieves goals efficiently. This difference extends beyond food. American democracy is similar messy, unpretentious, lacking the clarity and hierarchy that German systems emphasize. But it works. It generates prosperity, maintains stability, adapts to challenges. Maybe effectiveness matters more than elegance. Maybe we were wrong to prioritize form over function, tradition over adaptation, hierarchy over flexibility. The letter was more explicitly political, and censors debated holding it. But eventually, it was allowed through with redactions, reaching Heinrich's father who saved it, reread it after the war, used it as foundation for discussions with son about Reconstruction and democratic reforms that post-war Germany would need to adopt. The sandwiches became focal point for broader debates among prisoners about American culture, about democracy and capitalism, about values that produced abundance alongside apparent chaos. The conversations happened in barracks, after lights out, voices low, topics ranging from trivial to profound, everything connected somehow to peanut butter and jelly sandwiches as concrete example of American approach to everything. One faction, led by Lieutenant Werner Vogel, insisted American food was evidence of cultural inferiority, cheap mass production replacing craft and tradition, convenience valued over quality, democracy's leveling tendency reducing everything to lowest common denominator. The peanut butter sandwich, Vogel argued, represented exactly what was wrong with America. No sophistication, no refinement, no appreciation for proper standards, just crude functionality that appealed to masses without taste or education. Klaus challenged this interpretation, his professional knowledge giving him credibility. "I'm baker," he said. "I understand bread and quality and craft. But I also understand production and distribution and feeding populations. America feeds everyone adequately while maintaining quality standards that aren't highest but are consistently good. Germany fed elites excellently while letting ordinary people struggle. Which system better serves society?" The debate intensified, with Otto supporting Klaus. "I'm farmer," Otto said. "I know crops and livestock and food production. American agriculture is mechanized beyond anything we have. Yields per acre exceeding ours. Distribution systems ensuring food reaches everyone. That's not inferior, that's superior in the measure that matters most, which is feeding people reliably." Heinrich added intellectual framework. The question isn't whether American food matches German sophistication in specific dishes. Obviously, in many cases, it doesn't. The question is whether American system succeeds at goal of feeding population adequately, affordably, reliably. By that metric, they're winning decisively. Peanut butter sandwiches aren't haute cuisine, but they're nutritious, cheap, stable, accessible. That's victory through different standards than we've emphasized. But Vogel persisted. And what do they lose through this mass production and democratization? They lose craft, tradition, connection to land and culture. Their food is factory product, divorced from agriculture and cooking arts, reduced to industrial output. That's spiritual poverty, even if material abundance. The argument was irresolvable because it rested on fundamental value differences, whether feeding everyone adequately mattered more than maintaining culinary excellence, whether accessibility was worth sacrificing some sophistication, whether democracy's tendency to elevate common preferences was strength or weakness. The peanut butter sandwich couldn't answer these questions, but it crystallized them in ways theoretical discussions never quite achieved. December 1943 brought the prisoner's first American Christmas in captivity. and the camp administration organized celebration that included American holiday foods. The menu planning became educational opportunity. American cooks explaining traditional dishes, German prisoners comparing to their own Christmas traditions, both sides recognizing similarities and differences in how cultures marked the season. But the most surprising element was dessert. Peanut butter cookies, American Christmas staple that incorporated the now familiar ingredient in new form. Klaus worked with American cooks to prepare them, learning technique that transformed peanut butter from sandwich spread to baking. Ingredient watching how sugar and eggs and flour combined with peanut paste to create cookies that were crispy-edged and chewy-centered and intensely flavored. The cookies were revelation, even to prisoners who'd been skeptical about peanut butter sandwiches. The baking transformed the ingredient, heat and sugar and butter, creating complexity that sandwich version lacked, demonstrating that peanut butter wasn't inherently crude, but could be sophisticated when treated properly. Klaus ate one and understood immediately. This was what American food could be when it transcended pure functionality, when it aspired to pleasure alongside nutrition, when industrial ingredients were treated with craft rather than just convenience. He spent Christmas evening making more cookies, working in camp kitchen with permission from guards, using techniques learned from American cooks, but adapting them with German baker sensibility. He adjusted sugar ratios, modified baking temperatures, experimented with adding ingredients that Germans preferred: cinnamon, cardamom, hints of lemon zest. The results were hybrid American cookies made with German influences, combination that wouldn't exist except through war's strange displacements. He shared them with other prisoners and guards, and the reception was enthusiastic from both sides. The Americans appreciated seeing their traditions honored and adapted. The Germans recognized that American ingredients could produce genuinely good results when approached with proper technique. The cookies became symbol of what cultural exchange could achieve, not one side dominating, but both learning, adapting, creating something new that drew from multiple traditions. That evening, sitting in the barracks with cookies that were still slightly warm, Klaus wrote in his diary, "Made peanut butter cookies today using American ingredients and German techniques. They're good, genuinely good, not just adequate or satisfactory, but actually delicious." This feels important somehow, evidence that American and German cultures aren't incompatible, that good things can emerge from combining both, rather than insisting one must dominate. The war will end eventually, somehow, with someone winning and someone losing. But this moment, making cookies with former enemies, teaching each other techniques, creating something neither culture would have made alone, this suggests that after war, maybe cooperation is possible. Maybe former enemies can learn from each other, can build something better than either achieved separately. The cookies are just cookies, but they're also proof of concept for harder reconciliations that will be necessary. By spring 1944, the camp had developed unofficial but extensive cultural exchange programs centered around food. American cooks taught prisoners about regional cuisines, Southern barbecue, New England chowders, Midwest comfort foods, Western provisions. German prisoners reciprocated with their own traditions: proper bread making, sausage preparation, Christmas cookie techniques, beer brewing, theoretical, since alcohol wasn't actually produced in camp. Klaus became something like liaison, his baker training and growing English skills making him valuable interpreter between culinary traditions. He translated not just words, but concepts, explaining to Americans why Germans cared so much about bread density and crust, helping Germans understand why Americans valued convenience and consistency, bridging the gap between cultures that approached food from genuinely different philosophical foundations. The peanut butter and jelly sandwich remained central to these exchanges, symbol of American food culture that prisoners could actually experience daily, concrete example of industrial food system that powered American military and civilian abundance. Klaus could now make them competently, understanding optimal ingredient ratios and spreading techniques, able to explain to skeptical Germans why this strange combination worked despite violating European food principles. He even developed variations, adding banana slices, using different jellies, toasting the bread, creating upgrades that honored American original while incorporating German preferences for complexity. The variations were popular with both prisoners and guards, demonstration that culinary traditions could evolve through contact rather than remaining static, that food could be bridge rather than marker of irreconcilable cultural difference. By early 1945, with Germany's defeat increasingly obvious, the camp began preparing prisoners for eventual repatriation. The preparation included practical education English language classes, American government lessons, trade skills training. But it also included less formal cultural education, helping prisoners understand America so they could explain it to Germans who'd never traveled beyond Europe, so they could be bridges between former enemies in whatever post-war world emerged. Klaus was selected for advanced English classes. His facility with language and his curiosity about American culture making him a good candidate for interpreter work during occupation period. He studied systematically, improving vocabulary and grammar, but also continuing culinary education, learning more about American food culture, planning to use that knowledge as tool for cultural understanding. He wrote in his diary, "I'll return to Germany knowing how to make peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, peanut butter cookies, other American foods." This seems trivial compared to military knowledge or political understanding. But food is culture made edible, values made tangible. Teaching Germans about American food is teaching them about American values: efficiency over tradition, accessibility over hierarchy, functionality over form. Those lessons might be more important for Reconstruction than any political ideology. The observation was prescient. Post-war Germany would need to learn from American systems, would need to understand democratic capitalism, would need to adopt some American approaches while maintaining German identity. The prisoners who'd spent years in American captivity, who'd eaten American food and worked American jobs and learned American values, would be invaluable bridges during that difficult transition. Klaus's repatriation orders arrived in March 1945, and his last week at Camp Perry was bittersweet. He'd been prisoner for nearly 2 years, had grown accustomed to American rhythms, had formed unexpected friendships with guards and fellow prisoners, had learned things that would shape his entire life. His final day, he made peanut butter and jelly sandwiches one more time, savoring the taste that had once seemed so foreign and now felt familiar. Private Davis, the Iowa kid who'd first explained PB&J sandwiches, found him in the mess hall and sat down with his own sandwich. "Gonna miss these when you go home?" Davis asked, his English now easily understood by Klaus, who'd spent 2 years learning it. Klaus considered before responding. "I'll miss many things," he said. "The food, yes, but mostly the lessons about America, about culture different from mine, about former enemies who became something like friends." Davis nodded. "War's almost over. You'll go home, I'll go home. We'll try to build something better than the world that created this mess." He paused, then added, "Make peanut butter and jelly sandwiches sometimes, will you? Teach Germans about them. Small thing, I know, but it's connection. It's reminder that we're all just people trying to feed ourselves and our families, that the things dividing us are smaller than the things we share." The sentiment was simple but profound, the kind of wisdom that emerged from 2 years of daily interaction between people who started as enemies and become something more complicated. Klaus promised he would, and he kept that promise. He returned to Munich in May 1945, found his family's bakery damaged but repairable, began rebuilding while Germany collapsed, and rebuilt around him. Klaus Weber opened his bakery in Munich in 1946, starting with traditional German breads and pastries that customers remembered from before the war. But he also introduced American items, peanut butter cookies primarily, explaining to curious customers that he'd learned the recipe in American prisoner camp, that it represented cultural exchange between former enemies. The cookies sold moderately, novelty that some customers enjoyed, while others found too American, too foreign, too representative of occupation forces. But Klaus persisted, and gradually the American items became accepted, even popular. He introduced peanut butter itself in the 1950s, when import restrictions eased, teaching Germans about this strange American food product, demonstrating how it could be used in both sandwiches and baking. He wrote a small cookbook in 1958, American Foods for German Kitchens, that included peanut butter recipes alongside hamburgers, hot dogs, apple pie, other American items he'd learned during captivity. The cookbook was minor success, sold primarily to Germans curious about American culture during Marshall Plan years, when learning about America seemed patriotic rather than treasonous. Klaus used profits to expand his bakery, eventually opening 3 locations, becoming modestly successful businessman whose specialty was bridging German and American culinary traditions. He kept his prisoner camp diaries, donated them to a museum in 1990 when German reunification prompted reflections about war and occupation. The diaries documented his transformation from skeptical prisoner to someone who understood American culture, with special attention to food as cultural education tool. The peanut butter and jelly sandwich appeared frequently initially as strange alien thing, gradually as familiar item, finally as symbol of larger lessons about prosperity and values and systems that generated abundance. In 1993, Klaus received invitation to Camp Perry reunion, former prisoners and guards gathering 50 years after the facility had closed. He traveled to Ohio, now 73 years old, found Private Davis, who was 68, and they embraced like old friends, despite having been enemies. They made peanut butter and jelly sandwiches together, using same technique Davis had demonstrated 50 years earlier, and sat eating them while reminiscing about war and captivity and the strange paths that had brought them together. Klaus died in 2001, having lived long enough to see Germany and America as close allies. European Union incorporating some American federal principles, former enemies become partners. Among his possessions, his family found carefully preserved jar of American peanut butter from 1943, empty but kept as artifact for moment when strange food became symbol of cultural understanding. When Simple Sandwich challenged propaganda and began education about what America actually was versus what he'd been taught to believe. The peanut butter and jelly sandwich seems trivial children's food, simple comfort item, nothing profound or historically significant. But for Klaus Weber and thousands like him, it represented something larger, the moment when propaganda met reality and couldn't survive the collision, when direct experience contradicted indoctrination, when small acts of cultural sharing challenged certainties about enemy inferiority. The sandwich demonstrated American industrial capacity food production at scales that supplied both military and civilian populations, created surplus to feed prisoners generously, maintained quality standards while achieving massive distribution. It demonstrated American values, democratization of quality, belief that ordinary people deserved access to good things, preference for functionality over hierarchy. It demonstrated American confidence willingness to share culture with prisoners, trust that exposure to American ways would influence captives more effectively than harsh treatment. Klaus carried those lessons home, incorporated them into rebuilt life, taught them to children and grandchildren who grew up in democratic Germany allied with America. The lessons weren't about peanut butter specifically, they were about systems that generated prosperity, values that emphasized accessibility, approaches to problems that prioritized effectiveness over tradition. The sandwich was just delivery mechanism for education that transformed understanding. His grandson, Michael Weber, runs the family bakery now, still serves peanut butter cookies alongside traditional German items, still tells customers about grandfather who learned the recipe in American prisoner camp, who used food as tool for cultural understanding. who believed that former enemies could become friends through simple acts of sharing what they valued. The bakery displays Klaus's prisoner camp diary in a case by the register, open to page describing first encounter with peanut butter and jelly sandwich, his confused reaction, his gradual acceptance, his eventual appreciation. Visitors read the entry and smile at the cultural confusion, at German bakers' professional dismay over American food simplicity, at the journey from skepticism to understanding. But the entry's significance extends beyond amusement. It documents moment when individual prisoner began questioning propaganda, when direct experience challenged ideological certainty, when simple sandwich became symbol of larger truths about American capacity and values that regime had tried to hide. The peanut butter and jelly sandwich defeated German propaganda more effectively than military victories could, because it was undeniable, experiential, repeated daily for months until familiarity bred understanding. You could argue about American democracy's merits, could debate capitalism's strengths and weaknesses, could resist political indoctrination. But you couldn't deny that the sandwich tasted good, that it was nutritious, that every prisoner had access to it, that the system producing it functioned with reliability that propaganda had insisted was impossible. That evidence, accumulated over thousands of meals, transformed understanding in ways combat never could. Klaus Weber learned that Americans weren't weak or decadent. They were strong enough to afford generosity, confident enough to share culture, effective enough to feed prisoners and population and military simultaneously. He learned those lessons through peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, carried them home, built life and business around insights gained from strange food that became symbol of everything propaganda had gotten wrong. The jar he preserved sits in a museum now, empty artifact from 1943, representing moment when Klaus first tasted peanut butter, when American food became American education, when simple sandwich began transformation that would last lifetime. The jar is displayed with label explaining its significance. Peanut butter from Camp Perry, 1943, preserved by Klaus Weber as symbol of cultural understanding achieved through food, demonstrating that sometimes the most important victories are won not through weapons, but through willingness to share what you value and teach others why it matters. The jar is empty, the peanut butter consumed 75 years ago. But the lessons it represents persist, that enemies can learn from each other, that culture can be bridge rather than barrier, that simple acts of sharing can transform understanding more effectively than force ever could, that sometimes the strange, foreign food becomes familiar through exposure and teaches more than anyone expected about the people who created it.